Welcome to Life Mastery Radio with Todd Allen and Jackie Bailey, the show that dives into the science of higher consciousness with inspiring topics such as abundance, intention, health, manifestation, love, and transformation. Join Todd, Jackie, and their guests of leading authors, speakers, coaches, and entrepreneurs weekly at 10 a.m. Pacific. Learn to live a peaceful life with intentional mastery. It's all right here with stories and messages to support your well-being and most evocative dreams. Now, here's your hosts, Todd and Jackie.
Hey, it's another groovy day, and most of you already know, but I'm going to tell you anyway. That's because I make it that way. When I get up in the morning, I already decide it's going to be a groovy day, and sometimes I even forget about how I started out my day, and my day just turns out groovy. I guess that went around in circles a little bit. It's also a groovy day because it's Life Mastery Radio Day. Yay! A day that I get to hang out with my good friend, Jackie Bailey, and we get to rub elbows with some really cool people who are on the cutting edge of their own becoming, but more than that, they're leading others to their very own edge. And Jackie and I just enjoy talking to them and finding out what makes them tick and about their programs. And it just makes for a wonderful experience, right, Jackie? And then
it does.
We get to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. It's awesome. It's been great. We've put out a lot of wonderful content over the years. I mean, if we could go back, and it's probably all still relevant today, even though it might be 10 or 12 years old, right? It's still something you can be inspired by.
As always, my co-host was with me. Hi, Jackie. We already kind of conversed a little bit.
Yeah. Hi, Jackie Bailey here.
How are things going? You've got the Speak Feed Lead project. You're always busy. I see your Facebook posts, and you're always doing something. You know, people used to come up to me and say, "How do you do it all, Todd? How do you get it all done?" And I would just say, there's 24 hours in a day. 8 of them I should sleep. 8 of them I have to create some kind of sustenance to feed me, so I have dinner on my table, and then that leaves 8 hours, 8 whole hours to do something, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And within those 8 whole hours, there's another book that I have contributed to.
She's like 3 or 4 up on me, huh?
This is 5. This is book 5 for me now, the Parenting Owner's Manual. And this is a compilation book derived from a summit called the Family Matters Summit that is in coordination with the UN's National Day of the Family back in May. And there were 34 or so, actually there are more speakers than that, but 34 of those speakers contributed their message, their verbal presentation as in the form of a chapter to this book. And 8 of them are my students. Look at that. 8 authors that are now best-selling authors, and they're 12, well, actually 10 to 16. So what an amazing opportunity for them. And that's what the Speak Feed Lead project does. We not only give the skills to the kids and help them to achieve that, but we get them on stages and we get them talking, get their messages out in the world. So
that's very cool.
Yeah.
You can find out more at speakfeedlead.org or Google Jackie Bailey. You'll be amazed at how many things come up when you Google. She'll take up the whole page.
Because I'm so large.
I want to remind our listeners that today's show page is at www.lifemasteryradio.com, and we have a really cool link there that you're going to want to go and check out. So don't forget about it, because it's a lot of scribbling and it's a lot of fun. Jackie already did it. I couldn't find my crayons to be able to do it this morning, but I did promise myself I would go back and do it. But we have a really cool link. So if you go to our webpage and today's show page, there's a really cool link, and it's free, and you can go and check out that video, and it's a lot of fun. And I guarantee you will become, I don't want to give energy to infected, but you will become enthralled to be able to share this, especially with kids and other adults and maybe your office. And there's magic in it. I guarantee you there is. I could see and feel and hear. Even though I didn't do it, I could tell there was magic. So I'm just forewarning you, you're not going to want to miss this show, and you're going to want to go check out that link. And right now, I think this is Jackie's guest, so she probably has a nice little introduction so we can get this show on the road.
On the road. Yeah, thank you, Todd. Yes, we have a delightful guest today, and as always, you're going to come away from our show with added knowledge and some inspiration, and maybe even some items to take action on. So, Carey MacCarthy, and then her name is followed by all kinds of letters. There's M's and A's and L's and P's and all kinds of stuff. She is the founder and CEO of Startup Art Therapy. She's a registered art therapist with the Art Therapy Credentials Board, more letters, and a licensed professional clinical counselor through the Board of Behavioral Sciences, even more letters. So Carey has been professionally active within the art therapy field since 2001. She's a facilitator, presenter, researcher, author, and co-author of this facilitator's manual called Startup, a school-based arts curriculum for Native American youth and all cultures, interventions for development and learning. We're going to talk about that, I'm sure. Carey has practiced in the art therapy field with diverse populations, specializing in trauma of all ages and cultures, and Native American historical and intergenerational trauma. She is trained in the Red Road approach to healing with Lakota and Dakota tribes, and is a fluent Spanish speaker. Now, she's got a free video out there. Any of you who subscribe to our newsletter, there's a free video called Scribble Your Way to Calm. We'll probably talk about that a little bit, but lots of great conversation here today. Welcome, Carey. It's delightful to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Jackie and Todd, for having me today. I'm really happy to be on Life Mastery Radio.
Yay.
Very cool. So I got to know, growing up, what did you want to be when you grew up?
A dentist.
Really? Oh, that's funny. You and Jackie are cut from the same rug, because she was a dental. She wasn't a dentist, but she was, well.
I was an assistant, and then I became a surgical tech, and then I was an admin assistant, and then as office manager. I kind of went up the ranks for a long time.
She doesn't do that anymore. So see, you guys are about the same, because you didn't become a dentist. You became an influencer, right?
I sure did. And when I was 18, I found out about the art therapy profession, and my friend of mine said, yeah, you use art and psychology and therapy together. And I went, that's what I want to do. And I did it. Yeah.
Art is a communication tool that spans all borders, right? But what I'm learning is, especially what you teach, is it breaks down borders from trauma or other things in our mind.
Yeah, so the way that I use art therapy, it's called neurodevelopmental art therapy, and it rewires the brain from trauma, depression, and anxiety. And it's a bottom-up whole brain healing approach. And so there's left-right integration, because neuroscientists, after 25 years of research, posit that you cannot heal trauma without healing, getting both sides of the brain communicating. We call that dual hemispheric communication or cortical consolidation. So being able to, get the whole brain involved, and there's very specific scientifically designed art therapy activities that we've created in the Startup Art Therapy Facilitator's Manual that takes the trainers program. It takes the facilitator through a whole series of exercises that engages the 4 functioning structures of the brain from the bottom up.
Wow. Now, Carey, years ago when I was healing from some trauma myself, I saw a specialist. I don't remember if she called herself an art therapist. I don't recall that, but she had me take crayons and literally draw pictures like of my family and other events in my life. And she would be able to interpret from the color of the crayon that I chose to use, as well as looking at sizes of family members in relationship to where they were in the family, and if someone were like had a bigger head than another one, then she interpreted that, you know, that person had some more importance or something to me. So is that the kind of thing that you're talking about? Is that art therapy, or is that different?
That can be art therapy, absolutely. And, you know, we try to create a non-interpretive stance where we are not putting our interpretations, but we ask leading questions. What does that mean for you? How does that child feel, or how does that figure feel being next to that one in your case?
Right.
But and a lot of people, and I want to just really clarify, a lot of people are saying, oh yes, I'm an art therapist, but they've never been formally trained. And so art therapy is actually a master level degree that you have to go through a
Wow.
graduate program in specializing in art therapy. And I went to a 3-year graduate program, and you have to do a 3,000-hour internship and pass licensing exams, and to be able to, and you have to be registered with the Art Therapy Credentials Board. So I've got all of that.
That's all the letters after your name.
Yes, I'm not just picking up a box of crayons and saying I'm an art therapist. And a lot of people like to do that and say that, but you know, to really, just to clarify, to really be an art therapist, you got to have all that.
Okay.
But that's
Interesting.
I have a really good friend. She makes a living by going into corporations and into the boardrooms and doing exactly what you were talking about. She passes out paper and crayons, and then they play creative games that help to bring this team together. And I've always been fascinated by that. And then after getting ready for the show, fascinated by this. And what you said was that working with the art begins to create new neural pathways in the brain. And that's like, this is something that a drug can't do, right? A drug can't go in and do this. And yet we have this simple action and this creative process that then goes in and reprograms our brain. Did I get it right?
You did, Todd. Good job. Yes, it's a neuroplasticity based approach. So using our own self-directed neuroplasticity and taking ourselves off of that kind of or the maladapted stress response, that hamster wheel of negative feedback loop in our brains, and being able to use art to redirect and strengthen and rebuild neural pathways. Because in trauma, there's a lot of damage that can happen in the in that neural network, and they can actually cut off and be inflamed and cause damage in the brain, and inflammation that actually alerts the HPA axis in all bodily systems.
Wow.
And when we get a lot of physical symptoms, as well as that kind of hyperarousal response in the brain that causes anxiety, depression, aggression, that fight, flight, or freeze.
So now this, go ahead, Todd.
I just have one train of thought. So it's not necessarily just drawing, and it's not necessarily using crayons, right? We can expand this out and say a lot of hobbies get that creative process going. Can you give us examples? Because I know maybe we'll talk about it where the left and the right brain are intermingling, right? Isn't that where a lot of the healing comes from, when the left and the right intermingle? Are there examples of other hobbies or other creative processes that have that same effect?
You know, the reason why art therapy works to get both sides of the brain engaged is because art is a right brain activity and verbal expression is a left brain activity. And when you connect, you do both at the same time. So you're having a child image, or if you're using both hands, that bilateral stimulation gets both sides of the brain going with the art as they're doing the image. But then when they're hearing the instructions, the directive of, okay, now do it this way, now do it that way, it engages the auditory processing. But if you really have a directive of taking a child through an art therapy activity where they're drawing and that image is encoding in the brain. And then they're talking about the feeling states, the emotional articulation. It's actually regulating their emotional state as well. And you can create adaptive coping skills through that, but it's actually getting the brain communicating because they're verbalizing at the same time as they're drawing. So verbalization is a left brain function. So that's how art therapy is so important, how it works for that.
Now, how did you get into this, Carey? Did you have your own trauma that perhaps some art therapy was used to help you, or did you know someone that had a traumatic event that this helped? How did you even discover this? Because it's not something that's like, at least in this area, readily out there that people would know about.
Yeah, this is cutting edge information. So backing up a little bit. So neurodevelopmental art therapy was pioneered by Linda Chapman, who was one of my professors in grad school in art therapy, graduate school. And she's from Northern California, and she worked through UCSF Children's Hospital in the pediatric trauma unit. And she was working with a bunch of doctors and neuroscientists, and they started discovering this, the healing of trauma symptoms across the board. So, pretty soon she was my supervisor, and then, this is, 20 something years ago. And then she took me under her wing, and she's now retired and gave me her whole work, body of work of neurodevelopmental art therapy. So I've been building and expanding on it with neuroscience and cultural competence, and working with Native people and rebuilding, helping to rebuild First Nations people. That's my passion. And how I got there is, yes, I do have a very big history of trauma. When I was a little girl, my parents were both mentally ill. My father has Asperger's autism, and my mother was a borderline personality disorder with a severe alcoholism. And when I was 11, there was my family just fell apart, which ended up in the hospital with physical abuse, and we were almost taken away. And so I had to go live with my autistic father and brother, and that lasted a few years. And then I was on the streets. I got kicked out of the house, and I was a young teen on drugs in the punk rock scene in the 80s. And that's really what saved me, was having that, community of people. And then, my early 20s became a single mom. So I had a lot of trauma. A lot of trauma. And when I got into graduate school, I put myself through school as a single mom. And I noticed when I was in that graduate school, we had to do our own art therapy. And a lot of my own trauma symptoms started disappearing, started reducing. So I know firsthand that it works. And then later on, I ended up having, because I had that base of trauma, and my brain was kind of, primed for that maladaptive stress response early on. Later on in life, I had some mold reaction that resulted in me getting electrohypersensitivity syndrome, where I couldn't even be around computers, cell phones, cell towers. I could feel a mile away,
Wow.
Bluetooth, whatever. So I actually healed my brain from that using neurodevelopmental art therapy and a self-directed neuroplasticity-based approach called dynamic neural retraining system. So I know the power of our brains to heal ourselves firsthand.
Yeah.
Especially
That's
using.
incredible.
It is fascinating. There's another, because I watched another presentation that you did, and it had statistics and fact facts about the indigenous people and the suicide rates, and that just blew me away at how high they are. And you are going into the juvenile centers and into the schools. Have you noticed a difference? Is this making a difference? Is it working? It has to be working, I would imagine.
Absolutely. I just so I'm in South Dakota right now, and I am working with a group of grantees through the Project Aware SAMHSA grant. And there are many schools, 10 schools in Pine Ridge Reservation. I've just completed 4 trainings for them because we're using this as a model, a pilot that we're going to take out into all reservations and all tribal schools across the country. And so I just finished, 4 trainings and about to do a 5th training. I'll be home for a couple weeks and have to turn around and fly back over here. So they haven't been using it in their classrooms yet, but there are other trainees that have been using it in their classrooms with really good results. And we did a research study on the Startup Art Therapy Facilitators Manual through South Dakota State University. And Dr. Mary Lou Mylant was the primary investigator, and I was the co-PI because unfortunately I don't have a PhD. I should get an honorary PhD, dang it. With all the
Yeah.
work.
Life Mastery Radio will give you a PhD.
I'll take it. But yeah, we showed our research outcomes showed across the board the reduction of anger, depression, anxiety, post-traumatic symptoms, and dissociation and sexual thoughts across the board. So that's one of the ways that what I am passionate about is putting it in schools, because if you look at every teacher with a classroom of 30 children, they teach that to those children. I mean, that's a lot of children per school. And then you multiply that times 10 schools. And, it's like a DNA of a caterpillar.
And the activity doesn't take that long, right? I mean, it's just
45 minutes, and I mean, depending on what age group, and there's a guide to using, the time.
Here's my vision, Jackie. We're going to grab a box of crayons and some paper, and we're going to march into Congress. Right?
Those people need therapy, right? We're gonna do therapy with those people first.
And then we'll hit the Senate. And then we'll stroll right over to the White House, and but the implications are huge. Just that's where you were going with this. The implications are huge. This could be a game changer for our future.
Thank you for recognizing that. Yes. And if every child has access to this program, K through 12, and we're rewiring the brains, covertly as a prevention and intervention strategy from trauma, depression, anxiety, which, after a 3-year pandemic, folks, these children's brains have been hardwired for hyper alert and anxiety. And
excellent point. Excellent point.
Yeah. And so we need to redo that damage and then build that healthy foundational building block that the brain needs to build the nervous system, the sensory system, the emotional, perceptual, the cognition before academia can even begin to work. So building that optimal foundation, as for the brain to be, primed for learning and functioning properly, we'll see a whole new generation of people being, going through schools and having healthy relationships, boundaries, positive communication skills, community building, all of these things, as well as the adaptive coping skills to deal with their own traumas, especially Native children that are continually exposed to trauma on reservations and within their home environments largely. And that results in a high substance abuse and suicide rate. Yeah,
maybe we should talk about that for a minute, because what are some of the traumas that the children are currently experiencing, and are some of the traumas that you help them with generational traumas as well? So do you address both, and what are some of those traumas that they've dealt with?
Absolutely. Are we speaking about Native Americans?
Sure, let's stick with the indigenous people for now. Yeah.
Well, for one, there's historical trauma, and Maria Yellow Horse Braveheart coined that as being a trauma that has been experienced in successive generations, the predecessors, the ancestors, and it's carried through the DNA. And so one of the things I talk about is epigenetics of trauma. And it's actually stored as a chemical signature on the genetic markers. So there's that. And that's
Wow.
only 150 years ago that we're talking about all of the atrocities that have happened. But we still see these, really egregious micro and overt aggressions on Native American people throughout the country. And I'm here on the front lines right now in South Dakota and Rapid City, and there's still so much racism here that, natives are afraid to actually leave the reservation sometimes. And then I had a lady in my training recently, a couple of weeks ago, go, I don't like to leave the reservation. And she just says a little prayer like, God, please don't let me run into any racism today when she comes to Rapid City. So and it creates that social anxiety, and there's something called priming and kindling in the brain, where the brain develops that maladapted feedback loop, the maladapted stress response from racial trauma, and hate crimes and things like that. So it just takes one thing, and then it kind of spins out and creates that loop. And so that's one of the things I teach in my trainings is the neurobiology of trauma too, and the long-term impacts. So we see a lot of these kinds of things bleeding into the family systems, and then as well as the child abuse, physical and sexual abuse. I used to work with Indian Health Services. I was on the front lines going out to schools. Kids would come to me in my office on Pine Ridge Reservation. So I've seen a lot of stories, a lot of suicide. I used to have to do suicide assessments in the ER. And there's a lot of factors, and then that creates that intergenerational trauma, which perpetuates the historical trauma, right, in the epigenetics of trauma. So there's just so many things. But the good thing is that the Startup Art Therapy program, it's a whole brain healing system that when you are introducing the system, the body, to new thoughts, positive behaviors, and joy, and you're really rewiring the brain from trauma, you're affecting that genetic predisposition and historical trauma and reversing it.
Even the genetic memory that you talked about, because I know that is a thing, right? That is a generational thing that's passed down, and it's a genetic memory, but that has the ability of rewiring. So I can almost imagine that, the homelessness epidemic, getting people to own themselves, maybe, and all the crime. I mean, they're in and out of the jail system, and all the jail system would have to do is give them some paper and some crayons, right?
That's a great point, Todd. Actually, in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, they are a devoted group of art therapists through the Journey of Hope nonprofit have started using this curriculum in the juvenile detention centers. And I got the pleasure to go and observe and got clearance to go to the juvenile hall and sit in on their startup art therapy sessions, and it was just beautiful. And I got to interview some of the guards and the director, and they all said that they actually participate in the program themselves, and it really not only impacts them as the guards and on a personal level, but it sets the tone throughout the day for the whole all the staff and the inmates.
That is so cool.
That's incredible. So where do you start with the kids then? What are some of the basics that you start them on? Because you said there's several different activities and levels and things like that. So what's pretty basic?
So we begin, so there's 4 functioning structures of the brain, and the lowest one being the at the base of the brain called the cerebellum. So there's something in the startup facilitators manual that's the self phase. So that's where they start. And
Okay.
this book is broken up into 4 sections corresponding to those 4 sections of the brain. And that's all about sensory art, getting your 5 senses awakened and alive. And that's kind of like the startup part, in a motor, you have the starter that creates the spark that starts up the rest of the engine. So the brain is like an engine. So you start up that bottom part of the brain, and it creates the spark, and those neural pathways start growing on up to that executive functioning part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex that is responsible for decision-making, planning, wisdom, compassion, empathy, understanding right from wrong. So that's where we start in the facilitator's manuals, that bottom part of the brain. And there's very deliberate art therapy activities that we've designed to get all of the senses involved.
Awesome. And that's just drawing, or is there also music associated with this? Do you get all of the senses involved in this?
Yeah, so there's 6 key elements in each of the art therapy activities. So we get the sense of sight or sound engaged, and the bilateral stimulation. As you know, we do the bilateral scribble, then the bilateral drawing, and then we do the actual art therapy activity. So that is we use clay to, that's that tactile sense. We do, finger paints and things like that. And of course, drawing, but then we end it with closure discussion, which gets that left brain going, because in trauma, the left brain actually can turn off and atrophy. And you'll see in spectroscopy photos and MRI photos that in trauma, the brain has PTSD is actually smaller than a brain that does not have post-traumatic stress disorder. And so getting that left brain turned on is really important. So all of the information processing can happen and occur the way it's supposed to.
You just brought up PTSD. What I have to imagine the healing effects of this would be huge and off the charts with PTSD. Am I right?
Yes, absolutely. And this can be used not just with children, it can be used with adults too. So the Startup Facilitators Manual can be tailored to adults, but, I would love to write a book for, healing PTSD in veterans.
That's where I was going, right?
Yeah. And I'm working with a business coach now. We want to take this globally and get this translated into several languages. And, I'm only one person, but getting other facilitators to train other people out in the world too.
Do they have to go through the master's program to be a facilitator of what you're doing?
Oh, to become an actual facilitator, yes. Eventually when I start that program, it'll be other art therapists that will be doing this. But the way it is now, I train the layperson. So this has been designed for teachers, for therapists, coaches, parents, people who don't even have any background in psychology. The wording is very in layperson's terms, and and I really make a disclaimer, I'm not training them to be an art therapist. They don't have some like magical art therapy certificate at the end of
Right.
the training, but they are learning art therapy techniques to use in their practice or classroom.
Yeah, a
So you're
facilitator.
encouraging teachers then to use this in a regular classroom. It's not like a special event. They're just incorporating this into their regular curriculum.
Yes, it's twice.
Okay, cool.
Because it seems to me, in what I've heard, it's easy to incorporate, right? It's just maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes a day, do an activity. And like you said, I heard you say the word covertly, right? This is covert, begins to rewire that brain in a positive way. This isn't a negative. There's no way this could have a negative effect.
No, absolutely not. And, these are designed, the whole curriculum is designed for a whole school year or a whole, school year. But if you're using it in your office, you can just use it throughout the whole year. And it's designed to just address, not issues, but just strength-based. And it's not opening a can of worms. And that's the last thing you want to do in a group environment and in the school classroom is, have everybody melting down. So,
So in other words, traumatic memories don't necessarily come up with this system.
No, definitely
Okay.
not. But, it depends, if a child has come in with, is triggered and is experiencing a high level of activation, anything can trigger them. So it could be the art therapy curriculum, it could be math, science, whatever.
Yeah.
So, and being able to resource the teachers and parents and therapists to know how to interact with a child that is being triggered is really important too. And so I provide that. And I also provide ongoing coaching for the participants, the trainees. So they have that level of support to keep that going, because a lot of times in Indigenous cultures, a lot of people come in and say, oh, I'm going to save the Indian. And they come in, do a training and then leave. And there's no
Follow up. There's no consistency, right? Fascinating. You're going places, lady. You know that? I just feel that in my heart. You're going places. So we talked about on an individual basis, but how does it have an effect on teams if they did these activities together?
Absolutely. Yeah. Team building, it's really wonderful for that. And we kind of integrate that into a lot of the activities in the manual. Yeah.
Okay, Carey, so I have a question for you since I work with youth. If I got your manual, it would be clearly and easily spelled out for me the way that I could incorporate this into the curriculum that I have in regard to public speaking, for instance, for our students.
Communication, public speaking.
Yeah. So like taking a few minutes of an art, just a little art exercise that they would do. That's how I would start to incorporate this. Is that correct or not?
Yeah, absolutely,
Okay.
Jackie. It's an easy to use step-by-step manual. So anybody can look at it and just go down the list of instructions and, read a little bit about what the corresponding areas of the brain and the neural activity, how it's all working together. So you'd have but if you wanted to take the training,
Mm-hmm.
if you were a therapist, Jackie.
I can see Jackie's brain. I can see her brain going. So be prepared. She's going to connect with you.
I don't think you need it. You've got your own thing going on, Jackie.
Yeah.
If you were a therapist or a coach or wanting an additional trauma skill, trauma tool, then you could actually go to the website and find the online version of.
Got it.
Yeah.
So if these exercises, and I'm trying to figure out how to word this best, if these exercises don't necessarily bring up memories, or where someone is specifically working on a traumatic event, right? What do they feel? What does a typical person feel when they complete one of these exercises or activities? What do they go away feeling?
Well, a lot of things. I mean, very emotionally regulated. So they're calm, they're focused, they have, they're resourced because we're taking them through, things that are identifying, creating identity formation. And so they have, a safe place meditation with their ancestors, making amulets of their power animals, things like that. And it's all culturally competent. So the person who's facilitating the session can actually bring in, so if it's a native person, they can bring in their own cultural teachings. So they're really getting resourced and strengthened on so many levels, not only their culture and their emotional articulation and identifying feelings, and those feeling states, and then how to regulate them and down regulate, and engaging that parasympathetic nervous system to regulate the nervous system. So, and then they're creating the identity, and then they're creating empowerment and leadership skills.
So
And
would it be safe to say that it begins to dissolve anxiety?
absolutely. Yeah.
So calmness, that's where that comes from, the calm.
Yeah.
And just anxiety has nowhere to survive anymore because of these new connections.
Right. Over time, new neural networks are being formed so that hyperarousal state in the brain, the fight, flight, or freeze, gets decreased. So there's a less aggression, there is less anxiety, less depression, less suicidal ideation. Then the children will make healthier decisions over time and won't turn to substance abuse and won't turn to suicide, and will reduce rates of juvenile incarceration, and as well as eventually, the privatization of prison systems, that'll go down the tubes because they won't have anybody to put in the system.
Boy, that'd be awesome, wouldn't it? So I found a YouTube video where went through one of the exercises that you have. So you want to maybe talk about where that YouTube video could be found, what it's called, and encourage people maybe to go through this, and what does this mean? What is the result of that? What
Absolutely.
I did. Maybe describe it a little bit.
Yes, so that is the bilateral scribble technique that was developed by Linda Chapman and part of neurodevelopmental art therapy. And you can find that on my website. If you go to startuparttherapy.com, there'll be a pop-up modal, and you can get that free video called Scribble Your Way to Calm that takes you through the whole process. And it's really fun. You can use it for yourself. You can use it for your family, your children, your coworkers. It could be a party activity, a team building office. Or, if you're a therapist or teacher, bring it to your classroom and your therapy office. So
Cool.
basically this bilateral scribble, the principle behind it is getting both sides of the brain going using both hands. And scribbling, literally, there's no wrong way to do it. So it's really fun. You take two markers, one in each hand, and you go through, you listen to the video, and you have to engage both sides of the brain while drawing. And the reason why this is so effective is because the image in and of itself engages that right side of the brain responsible for imagination. And then when you're listening to the instruction, that engages that left brain. So we do something also called crossing the midline, which is really important in a lot of different professional jurisdictions. Even occupational therapists understand this, is when you cross that midline, and you can see how Jackie's done, the crisscross and going from one side of the paper to the other using both hands and crossing them over. And that actually helps the brain to understand that the other side exists. And I used to use a similar technique with stroke victim rehabilitation. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, that's something we really haven't talked about. So the trauma that we've been describing and talking about is mental trauma, right? But there's physical trauma. And I listened to another podcast I think you did, and you described a man that had physical trauma. He couldn't speak, or he had a hard time linguistically. And it wasn't you, but it was probably your colleague, had him do these exercises, and then he began to be able to articulate his speech. And then they asked him, well, how is this happening? And he stated, it's because of the scribbling you have me do.
Great, Todd. Yes, actually, that was one of my startup art therapy trainees, and she used just a few sessions, just only using that bilateral scribble technique with a child, a 16-year-old boy who was kind of nonverbal. He had a lot of issues articulating verbally, and that's that left brain turning down or shutting down after trauma, after a chronic trauma, not really just acute one-time event, but chronic repeated trauma. So his left brain had shut down a bit, and getting that, doing both sides of the brain, that work, that bilateral work, helps turn on that left brain. And so he started verbalizing more easily and more complete sentences. And so she said, oh, I'm noticing that you are having an easier time speaking in fuller sentences. And he says, yeah, it's that scribble thing you have me doing.
That's awesome.
So that's one way to use it, but that was also as a result of trauma. But I had worked in a physical rehabilitation hospital back in earlier part of my career, and I had developed a sequential art therapy activity using a cigar box, but it's not an actual cigar box, and tissue paper, colored tissue paper. And I would have stroke victims come in that had complete paralysis on one side of the body. So using the neuroplasticity approach and getting the brain engaged using the art process is entirely possible. So just through a sequential activity protocol that I developed, where they would have to just, say the right side of their body was paralyzed, they would have to take their left hand and pick that right hand up and put it on the table. And then I would help them use their pincer grasp to tear the paper. And then I had apparatus that helped them hold a brush, and then they'd have to take, with their left hand, dip the brush that was held in the right hand, brush it on, then and it was a very timely process, then take the tissue paper, put it on the box, and then another coat of glue. So through this process, after 3 weeks of doing this, they were able to regain complete use of the right side of their body with cutting scissors, writing again. Their speech aphasia, if they had affected speech, was completely abated because they were able to work in a group and talk about the feelings of, loss of ability to walk after stroke and things like that. So they had that emotional support and, the verbalization. So there's other ways that art therapy can work. It's super powerful. And
It's magic, Carey.
It's
just pure magic. And it's covert.
Yeah.
And it's
while having fun.
Yeah.
I think that is so cool. Oh my goodness, ladies. We only have about 4 minutes left. And Carey, I hope you'll come back, because I think there's a lot more that we could talk about. And we want to stay up to date with your progress. And well, I think you and Jackie are going to become pretty close friends anyway.
Absolutely.
Any takeaways, Jackie? I mean, this is just fascinating, and this is on the cutting edge. This is
Yeah,
many
well,
have go-
go ahead, Todd.
I was just going to say many have gone before her with similar things, but she's put it all together.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you and I have had a lot of guests on this show from the medical community, Western medicine, and from Eastern medicine, and from spiritual medicine, right? And here's a new modality that also enhances the skill of our own bodies to heal, right? And we talk to a lot of people that teach us methods of that, right, Todd? So this is another amazing way to tap into our brain itself through something fun, not physical therapy, which can be painful and hard. And we can make huge strides in healing, I think, our brain health, but also traumatic injury, both physical and emotional, sexual, whatever the case might be, right? It is fascinating. And this is going to, I love all of this because it's going to start becoming more the norm.
Yeah.
When all of these different ideas, start people, because I was just interviewing on the summit I mentioned, I was just interviewing someone who is now a functional medical consultant. He was an MD and left the field because he realized it was just more like, here's a prescription, and that he didn't want to treat people that way. So now he deals more with the functional health. And he says, the medical industry has to change because we are relying too much on prescriptions to get us through everyday life. But Carey, you're offering something that seems so simple and yet so ingrained in our own ability to make a difference in who we are and our own brain health. So I'm very amazed by it and intrigued by it. I was when we first had our conversation, but now that we've gone a little bit deeper into that, it's pretty amazing. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Carey, for showing up as you. Any last thoughts, any last parting shots that you'd like to give us? We have your link on our website at www.lifemasterradio.net. You can go there and watch the video and get out some colored crayons. But anything else come to mind? Last shot.
No, I just appreciate you, Jackie and Todd, for having me on Life Master.
A lot of fun. This is really cool.
For listening, and please contact me. You can also reach me at Carey@startuparttherapy.com. That's CAREY, Carey@startuparttherapy.com, and email me directly or go to the website startuparttherapy.com. And I would just love to, I'm welcoming collaboration and growing this in the coming year. So thank you so much for having me.
Excellent.
I just got this flash in my mind because I've raised 3 kids, 3 girls, and they all had coloring books. And I can remember in the beginning, it's nothing but scribbling, right?
That's right.
They're doing it naturally. They're beginning to make those connections. And so we just need to take it back to the basics.
Mm-hmm.
Check it out. Thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And my biggest hope is that you'll tell a friend about Life Mastery Radio with Todd and Jackie. They are a couple of cool cats, and they have some really cool guests. And did you have a groovy time today, Carey?
I had a groovy time.
It's pretty groovy. It's a groovy show. That's about all we have time for. Lastly, please make it a great day, because it is all about choice. And choose to check out Carey's system. You'll be amazed. Bye-bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to Life Mastery Radio. Join Todd Allen and Jackie Bailey and their guests of leading authors, speakers, coaches, and entrepreneurs weekly at 10 a.m. Pacific. Learn to live a peaceful life with intentional mastery through stories and messages to support your well-being and most evocative dreams. Visit their website, www.lifemasteryradio.com. Join their mailing list and be notified about upcoming guests. That's lifemasteryradio.com.